In the ward for abandoned infants, a nurse forgot to feed a baby. He was quietly crying, understanding in his own way that no one was coming. But before we begin, let us know in the comments what state you're watching from. Enjoy the story. "We understand the responsibility," said the woman sitting across from Ann Wilson in a hushed tone. "It's just scary. Do you think we can do it?" And tilted her head slightly, studying the couple with her signature look, deep and piercing. "You know," her voice was soft but carried steel beneath, "a wise man once told me, fear is part of love. If you weren't scared, I doubt how serious you truly are." She pulled out a folder. "Ethan is a special boy. His body may be limited, but his heart and mind are absolutely free. He's just waiting for someone who'll learn how to understand him." Half an hour later, after seeing the potential adoptive parents out, Ann walked over to the window. Autumn rain had started to fall, turning the world beyond the glass into a watercolor sketch, blurred and hazy, where the past and present melted into a single canvas. 20 years earlier, the old county hospital had loomed over young Annie like a storm cloud. She gripped her newly earned medical diploma tighter, her fingers nervously pulling at the collar of a blouse too formal for her age. "This isn't at all what I imagined," she whispered, eyeing the chipped paint on the walls of the admitting room. Everything here breathed exhaustion, as though the walls had absorbed years of other people's pain. "New girl," a raspy voice came from behind. Annie turned. A woman stood there, her graying hair pulled tightly back, her steel-gray eyes holding a flicker of life. "Ann Johnson. Just out of medical college, assigned here." Annie extended her hand, trying to mask her nerves. The woman looked her over, as if weighing how much this fragile girl with shining eyes could handle. "Mary Smith. Head nurse. Come, I'll show you where you'll be fighting." Annie flinched at the word fighting, but followed silently down the corridor that reeked of disinfectant and something else, something faint and unsettling. "That's the procedure room. Over there, the staff room," Mary spoke in clipped tones, as if rationing words. "Rooms 1 through 5 are for kids with parents. 6 and 7, for those who have at least some kind of home." She stopped at a glass partition at the end of the hall. "And this," her voice lowered, "is the abandonment ward. The ones who've been left by everyone." Mary looked at Ann with a bitter half-smile. "Mothers come in, hear the diagnosis, sign the papers, and run off to a new life, one without extra baggage." And recoiled as if the words had struck her chest. But Mary was already opening the door to a world where hearts break from sheer pain. "Here they are, our little angels," her voice softened, and Ann, holding her breath, noticed how a trembling hand gently adjusted the blanket in one of the cribs. "This little guy is 4 months old, hydrocephalus. His mother didn't even look at him before walking out. We're treating him for pneumonia. He'll be discharged soon." A lump formed in Ann's throat. "This is Emily, 2 years old," Mary continued, pointing to a little girl with wispy, almost translucent hair. "Epilepsy. Her parents held on for a year. Then gave up. Said she wouldn't survive anyway." And stepped toward the crib, her heart breaking. Emily's large, serious eyes looked straight into her soul. "Hey there, sweetheart," Ann whispered, brushing the fragile little hand. "And here's Michael, 6 months old. Digestive issues," Mary's voice trembled, but she quickly regained control. "We're expecting another lucky one today. Anyway, let's go. You've got a ton to do." The day passed in a blur. And filled out forms, nodded to unfamiliar faces, memorized protocols, but her thoughts were like a magnet, pulling her back to the abandonment ward, to those tiny hearts. By the end of her shift, while packing up her things in the staff room, she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. They brought him in, a passing nurse called out. "Go help. Mary said you need to see this." And froze. Her heart raced as she rushed toward the ward. At the door, she ran into the paramedics wheeling in a specialized incubator. 6-month-old male, mild cerebral palsy, respiratory infection, the doctor reported. Documents are with the file. The mother gave him up right in the maternity ward. That's it for us, we're heading back. And stood motionless, watching as Mary and another nurse gently transferred the infant into a crib. When they stepped aside, she finally saw him, a tiny body wrapped in a hospital blanket. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Enormous, staring straight through everything, as if this baby already knew all there was to know about cruelty in the world. Cute, isn't he? Mary handed and the medical chart. Here, read this. The usual. Young mother. First pregnancy. Heard the diagnosis and said, I don't want a cripple. And walked over to the crib. The baby wasn't crying. His arms and legs twitched with involuntary movements, characteristic of his condition. She gently reached out her finger and touched his tiny palm. His fingers reflexively curled around hers. The weeks in the pediatric infectious disease ward blurred into one long whirlwind, faces, diagnoses, the dim corridor lights, all blending into an exhausting blur. The unit was overwhelmed. Short-staffed. Every shift felt like a battle. Nurses, dulled by routine, cared for children mechanically, one nurse to 15 infants, each of them desperately needing more. And saw how even the hopeful newcomers burned out within a month, becoming just as gray as the hospital walls. You're still hanging on, Annie, Mary said one day, scribbling into a logbook. Still looking at them like people. That'll pass. And stayed quiet, feeling her heart tighten in her chest. That night, a storm hit the ward. 3 severe cases, fevers soaring past 104, seizures. The staff rushed between rooms, machines beeped and shrieked, the floor shook under the weight of frantic footsteps. Annie, 3rd room, oxygen dropping. 13 hours. And worked on autopilot, her arms moved on muscle memory, her brain numb, her body powered by instinct alone. By 6 a.m., when the hospital finally settled into weary silence, and remembered the abandonment ward. So much had changed in a week. Emily had been transferred to a specialized center, the baby with hydrocephalus sent to a care home. Only Ethan remained in the now empty room, alone, like a forgotten star in the pre-dawn darkness. As soon as Anne opened the door, something felt off. Normally, the air carried the scent of baby formula and medicine. Now it reeked, of a soiled diaper, of something sharp and troubling. She glanced at the feeding chart on the wall and froze. The last entry was at 7 p.m. No one had fed the baby in over 10 hours. Oh my God, she gasped, rushing to his crib. Ethan lay there, a tiny island of life in the sterile stillness. Amid the chaos of new patients and emergencies, the one child left in isolation had simply been forgotten. His little body was motionless, only his chest rising and falling ever so slightly. His eyes were half closed, his cheeks stained with dried tears, lips cracked. And that sound, a faint, broken whimper, as if he no longer believed anyone would hear him, yet still tried to say, I'm here. I'm still alive. A wave of fury and anguish crashed over Anne. This child, already abandoned by his mother, had now been forgotten by the hospital staff as well. Crossed off like an inconvenient task in the chaos of the night shift. Who was on duty overnight? Her voice rang down the corridor like an alarm. A sleepy face peeked out from the staff room, Olivia, a trainee barely a month on the job. Me, but we had admissions, and Mary said that was the priority. You were assigned this child, and said, her voice trembling with something raw. Something breaking inside her, a wall between professionalism and humanity. He hasn't eaten in 10 hours. He stopped crying. Olivia, do you understand what that means? From the far end of the hall, Mary appeared. Her footsteps were slow, heavy. Anne, calm down. We're understaffed. This baby what? And turned to her, tears streaming down her face. Is less important. Doesn't deserve care. He's already been left behind, and now we're going to leave him too. Mary stared at her for a long moment, unreadable. I'll take care of him myself, and said quietly. My shift's over, but I'll stay. And later we're going to talk about how to organize shifts so this never happens again. As an intern, she technically wasn't allowed to perform many procedures on her own, but she didn't care anymore. She heated some water, found clean diapers, prepared the formula. Her movements were precise, steady, even after a 12-hour shift. Gently lifting Ethan in her arms, she felt his little body melt into hers. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she whispered, bringing the bottle to his lips. I'm so sorry we let you down. At first, he didn't react. And softly ran the nipple of the bottle across his lips to moisten them, then let a few drops fall into the corner of his mouth. Ethan swallowed. That's it, baby, her voice trembled. She fed him slowly, whispering to him the whole time, telling him about the view from the window that morning, about the rain, the world beyond these walls. You're strong, she whispered. So strong, Ethan. When the bottle was empty, she didn't lay him back down. She held him close, rocking him, talking to him. And then she noticed something. His eyes were no longer staring through her, they were looking at her. He saw her. He recognized her. In that moment, and made a silent vow, that this child would never again go hungry, never again feel forgotten. I promise, she told him, not yet realizing the full weight of that word, or how it would change her life forever. And began picking up extra shifts in the abandonment ward. She gave everything to Ethan. She created a schedule just for him, massages to ease his tight muscles, exercises to stimulate movement, and warmth to feed his soul. Nurses, used to looking away from the difficult kids, now watched her in astonishment. And buried herself in books on cerebral palsy, begged neurologists for help. This boy has a chance, one doctor said, flipping through Ethan's chart. It's a mild form. It'll take patience. 2 weeks later, Ethan was transformed. His eyes sparkled with life, a shy smile appeared on his face. He reached for and tried to lift his head. But one day, as she was getting changed in the locker room, Mary stopped her. The head nurse's words hit like a sentence. You've grown attached, she said, exhaling cigarette smoke. Don't do that. The group home won't be kind to him. Love will just make it worse. Her face, lined and weary, softened, her voice shook. I was like you, 20 years ago. Took care of a girl named Grace, cystic fibrosis. She called me Mama. And then, Mary crushed out her cigarette. I found her in an institution, lying in filth, covered in sores. Dying. When she saw me, she turned to the wall. The memory of love, in a world without it, that's torture. And froze. Her throat clenched with emotion. He needs warmth, she whispered. I know, Mary replied, gazing at the sky. But the world is cruel. She walked away, leaving and with a thought that tore her apart. To you, he's a moment. To him, you're the whole world. Back at home, and received a phone call. Where have you been? Her fiancé Alex's voice was sharp. We haven't seen each other in 2 weeks. I'm working, Alex, she answered tiredly. We've had a flood of patients. So the patients matter more than me now? We're getting married in 6 months and you haven't even seen the venue I booked. And closed her eyes. How could she explain that right now, every restaurant in the world seemed meaningless compared to what she witnessed in that hospital? I especially love this new thing of yours, clinging to sick babies, Alex continued. Tell me, why are you taking extra shifts? You're not some specialist in hopeless cases. They're not hopeless, her voice sharpened. They've just been abandoned. And, be realistic. You can't save everyone. These kids, they're the state's problem, not yours. The state doesn't hold their hands when they're scared, she said, surprised by her own fierceness. After the call with Alex, she tried her mom, hoping for support. But heard the same thing. "Annie, you're burning yourself out," her mother said gently. "You can't take on everything. You've barely been there a week and you already don't sound like yourself." That night, she dreamed of Ethan. He stood, strong, upright, and took a step toward her. And she knew, she would go back to that ward tomorrow. And the day after that. And for as long as it took. In just a month, Ethan had changed completely. His skin had a healthy tone now, the translucent veins no longer showing. His little hands no longer flailed helplessly, they reached confidently for the toys and brought from home. One afternoon, returning from lunch, she heard voices coming from the department head's office. The door was slightly ajar, and though she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, she slowed her pace. "The paperwork's done," a woman's voice said. "We're moving Ethan next week. He's already stayed here longer than he should have." "I understand," the department head replied, his voice heavy. "But the progress is obvious. Can't we give him more time?" "Dr. Thompson," the woman's tone was laced with tired condescension, like someone explaining the obvious, "we have a line of children just like him. This is how the system works. The hospital treats, we provide housing until adoption or," she didn't finish, but Anne knew the rest, "until age 18. Until the end. Until they're discarded." Something collapsed inside Anne. She could no longer pretend that Ethan was just a patient. "You see that response?" a neurologist asked later, gently brushing the sole of Ethan's foot. His leg twitched, not the chaotic spasm of earlier weeks, but a purposeful movement. "Outstanding progress," the doctor murmured. And stood beside him, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Were you doing the massage technique I recommended?" he asked. "Yes, every day," she nodded. "And the exercises?" "I read to him, played music. I noticed he responds to tone of voice, and to melodies." The doctor looked at her thoughtfully. "You know what's the saddest part of my job," he said. "Seeing potential that will never be realized. With the right therapy, this boy could live a full life. But in the system," he paused, locking eyes with her. "You know how it is. At the group home, there won't be therapy. And without it, he'll lose everything he's gained, fast." The truth hit Anne like a slap. "Isn't there anything we can do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Only adoption," the doctor said with a shrug. "But who would take a child with a diagnosis like this?" That night, Anne didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, Ethan's face imprinted in her mind. Motherhood isn't about giving birth, she thought as dawn crept through the window. It's when you can't breathe fully without another person. When their pain becomes your own. When their future matters more than your present. How strange life is, she mused. Just a month ago, all her dreams and plans revolved around her career, the wedding, a trip to Europe. And now her entire world had shrunk to the size of a tiny boy who needed her more than anyone else on earth. "You're insane," Alex's voice cracked with rage on the phone. "This is crazy, Anne. I didn't sign up for this." Sitting alone in the break room, Anne clutched the phone so tightly her fingers ached. She had braced herself for a hard conversation, but every word still tore at her. "I'm not leaving him, Alex," she whispered, voice trembling. "I can't. What about our plans? Our wedding? Have you forgotten?" And shut her eyes. She felt the ground crumble beneath everything she once thought important. "That doesn't matter anymore," she exhaled. "Can't you love him the way I do?" The silence on the other end hurt more than words. "A crippled kid?" Alex finally spat. "I wanted my kids, not someone else's with a pile of issues." Each word struck like a whip. "Don't you dare call him that," her voice was like ice. "You choose, Alex, him or me. But I won't give up this child." She ended the call before he could reply. There were no tears. Just a strange stillness, and freedom. The fight with the system was exhausting. Offices blurred into a single, endless hallway of bureaucratic doors, behind which sat people with blank faces and lifeless eyes. "You're young, inexperienced, single," one woman droned, eyes fixed on her paperwork, "not on, and your financial situation is unstable. And the child has special needs." "I'm a healthcare professional," Anne said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can provide proper care. I have specialist support." "You're a medical intern," the woman corrected her without emotion. "You haven't even completed full certification. What will happen when you have to choose between your job and the child's care?" Help came unexpectedly, from Dr. Thompson, the head of her department. After a grueling shift, he called her into his office and handed her an envelope with an official seal. "My recommendation," he said quietly. "James Wilson on the committee, he's an old friend. He said he'd do what he can." And stared at the envelope, stunned, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've been in this system for 20 years, Thompson continued, staring out the window. "You know how many kids could have been saved if people saw souls instead of statistics? Fight for that boy, Anne." But the conversation with her parents broke her heart. Her mother, terrified, nearly shouted, "Annie, you're ruining your life. A sick child." Her father paced the room like a caged animal. "This is the end of your future. Don't expect help from us." And looked at them, so familiar, so distant, and felt something inside her break. "I can't leave him," she whispered, eyes burning with tears. She already knew her heart had made its choice. There was no turning back. A month of battling bureaucracy felt like an eternity. But the letter finally came, the adoption was approved, with stipulations, but approved. The world lit up. Colors returned. Sounds had meaning again. And raced to the orphanage where Ethan waited, her heart finally unburdened, as if she had surfaced from underwater. "I have to warn you," the director said in a flat tone, "the boy is in a depressed state. Refuses to eat, doesn't respond to stimuli. We even considered hospitalization." They stopped in front of a door painted with a cheerful sun and labeled Group 4. "There are 4 children in this room with similar diagnoses," the director added, opening the door. The room was clean and neat. 4 cribs stood in a row. In the farthest one, Anne immediately recognized Ethan. He lay turned toward the wall, his little body looking more fragile than ever. Something inside and shattered. "Ethan," she called softly. Nothing happened. She stepped closer. Then, a miracle. He turned. His big eyes widened when they met hers. A second of recognition, and then his tiny face burst into a smile, so radiant it lit up the whole room. Ethan raised his hands and made a sound, not a cry, but something closer to a joyful coo. And rushed to him, scooped him into her arms, and held him close. His tiny heartbeat thumped against hers, and in that moment, she knew, they had always been one. Now the world could see it too. "Incredible," the director murmured, watching them. "We thought he'd completely disconnected from reality." And just smiled, showering his little face with kisses. "Let's go home, baby," she whispered, feeling Ethan nestle into her chest. The tiny studio apartment was completely transformed. Once filled with textbooks and stacks of medical journals, the room now breathed with new life. A crib took center stage. Toys were arranged within easy reach of small hands. Every inch of space had been carefully thought through. And rocked Ethan by the window. Not long ago, her hands would tremble from exhaustion, but now, it was as if she had forgotten what it meant to be tired. Looking at her sleeping son, she knew she would give anything for these moments. Mornings began with a ritual, gentle massage, stretching, warm water therapy to wake up his stiff muscles. And studied every method she could find, carefully tailoring what worked best for him. "Just a little more, sweetheart," she'd whisper, seeing pain flash in his eyes. we're going to make it." A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. On the threshold stood Mary, awkward without her nurse's uniform, holding a box of chocolates and a plush teddy bear. "We were just talking about you," and smiled, letting her in. Mary froze when she saw Ethan. Sitting in a high chair, playing with blocks, he beamed at her, his smile like a ray of sunlight. "Oh my God," Mary whispered, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "He's different. Alive." And nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The tough-as-nails Mary, who had seen thousands of cases, approached Ethan gently, reverently. "Remember Auntie Mary?" Her voice shook. Ethan, usually shy, reached out and touched her cheek. "This is love, Anne," Mary whispered through tears. "You're working a miracle. I'm proud of you." The rehabilitation center, a modest 3-story building on the outskirts of town, required an hour's travel and a bus transfer, but Anne never missed a session. For Ethan, she would do anything. This place was where miracles happened for children with special needs. "Ethan's here with his mom," Anne said at the reception desk. "Dr. Rodriguez." "Last door down the hall," the nurse replied quickly. A new doctor, Anne thought, accustomed to long waits and staff turnover. David, young, with warm dark eyes, radiated kindness. His handshake was firm but gentle. "Anne. And this must be Ethan," he smiled, kneeling in front of the boy. "Hey buddy, can you show me how you sit up by yourself?" Ethan grinned proudly and straightened his back. "Good job. And now those hands," David encouraged him. Then, turning to Anne, he said, "You two are rare. These kinds of results. Incredible. Let's meet twice a week, I can even come to your place and adapt exercises." Anne nodded, feeling a heavy weight on her heart begin to lift. David entered their lives like a breeze through a stuffy room. He came twice a week, and every visit felt like a celebration for Ethan. He didn't just lead physical therapy sessions, he brought games, books, handmade tools, and a boundless optimism that Anne hadn't realized she so badly needed. "I can't keep paying you for all these extra sessions," Anne said one evening as David stayed late, helping to put Ethan to bed. "I'm not taking your money," he replied simply. "You know, seeing how hard he tries, how he fights, it inspires me more than anything else ever has." She noticed something about the way David talked about Ethan. He never said sick, disabled, or even special needs. He just called him a boy who happened to reach milestones at a slower pace. "You're going to bring him here?" The voice trembled with anger, a woman's voice. And froze in place just outside the door, her heart tightening. It was her first time visiting David's family. She'd left Ethan with the neighbor, as David had asked her to come alone. Now she understood why. "Mom, I love Anne," David said calmly but firmly. "Ethan is part of her. He's part of us." "Part of us?" his father's voice exploded. "A stranger's child with problems? Find yourself a normal girl. Have healthy children of your own." "Don't you dare speak like that," David interrupted quietly but with steel in his voice. "Your young son," his mother, Isabella, said, her tone softening. "You're acting out of pity. But pity isn't love." And felt the sting in every word. She turned away quietly. At home, Ethan would be waiting, the little boy who had just learned to gently touch her cheek with his tiny hand. "Everything okay?" asked Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor, seeing the dark look in Anne's eyes as she returned. "Just tired," Anne lied, hugging her son tightly. That night, she messaged David, "We need some time apart." The days that followed were long and silent. Anne buried herself in their world, she and Ethan, their training, their routines. She would manage. She always had. But one evening, the silence shattered. The doorbell rang. David was standing there, drenched in rain. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out," he said as he stepped inside. "I'm not hiding," Anne replied, folding her arms, tears burning behind her eyes. "I heard your parents. They'll never accept us." David stepped closer. "My parents live in the past. You and Ethan, you're my family. And I'll fight for you both." The wedding was small, just a few of Anne's co-workers, a couple of David's friends. His parents didn't come. But Mary did, bringing a huge cake, and so did Dr. Thompson. The most emotional moment of the ceremony was Ethan. A year and a half of relentless effort had paid off. Supported by a walker, he made his way down the aisle toward his mom, clutching a tiny bouquet. And dropped to her knees, receiving his gift with tears streaming down her face. David officially adopted Ethan a month later. But the truth was, he'd already been a father long before any paper said so. In the nights when he held Ethan's hand during fevers, in the countless repetitions of exercises, in the unwavering belief in a future no one else could see, he had always been Ethan's dad. Years passed. Ethan grew, defying every skeptical prognosis. At age 5, he took his first steps without support. And Anne grew, too, not just as a mother, but as a professional. She pursued further education in special education and pediatric rehabilitation. When she returned to the hospital, it wasn't as an intern, it was as a specialist in neurodevelopmental recovery. One day, a young, frightened woman was brought into Anne's office, holding a newborn in her arms. "They suspect cerebral palsy," a colleague said softly. "The mother is in shock. She's talking about giving the baby up." Anne took the baby into her arms and looked into the woman's eyes filled with panic and shame. "You know," Anne said quietly, "my son was born with CP2. The road is long. But it's worth every step." And stood by the window of her office at Little Steps, the rehabilitation center she had led for the past 7 years. The walls were decorated with diplomas, certifications, and awards. The shelves were lined with books, dozens of them, co-authored with her husband, Professor David Rodriguez, head of pediatric neurology at the county clinic. A call interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, we'll be there by 7, Ethan's voice came through the receiver, deep now, calm and warm, a tone he had picked up from David. "Kate's a little nervous. Just, don't give her the full interrogation, okay?" he laughed. After the call, Anne paused to look at the photo on her desk, her son, now a third-year psychology student. A tall, thoughtful young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Only the faintest limp in his unique grace and movement hinted at his past. The house smelled of spices and fresh bread. "They're here," David said, peeking out the window. "And judging by how long they've been sitting in the car. Kate must be gathering her courage." And smiled. She had seen this moment so many times, young women meeting their partner's parents for the first time, afraid of being judged, afraid of not being accepted. She knew that feeling all too well. "Robert and Isabella aren't coming?" she asked, referring to David's parents. "Dad's nursing his back. They'll come Sunday." David wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Mom asked me to tell you, she already baked your favorite apple pie for her new daughter-in-law." That sentence still filled Anne with warmth. What a journey it had been, from rejection to acceptance, from being the girl with the disabled child to beloved family. Years of distance had slowly turned to love, especially after Robert's stroke, when Anne had cared for him day and night, using the same rehabilitation techniques that had once saved Ethan. The doorbell rang. Ethan stood on the porch, tall, confident, nothing like the silent baby she had once found in a hospital crib. Beside him was a delicate young woman with a disarming smile. "Mom, Dad, this is Kate," Ethan said, his voice full of tenderness as he looked at her. "It's so good to finally meet you," and hugged the girl. "Ethan's told us so much about you, I feel like I've known you for years." Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, like a river finding its course. Kate relaxed, sharing stories about her work as a psychologist, her volunteer work, their plans for the future. They had met at the same rehabilitation center where Ethan had once been a patient. She worked with children, and he visited to give motivational talks to parents. Ethan put down his fork and took Kate's hand. "We have some news," he said. That pause, and would remember it forever. "We're having a baby," he said, his eyes glowing with joy. "You're going to be grandparents." David jumped up, hugging his son, then Kate. And froze for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. "And there's one more thing," Kate added, gently rubbing her still flat belly. "We've decided to start a foundation, to help children with cerebral palsy. We're calling it Silent Love," Ethan said. "In honor of our story." Later that evening, Anne came across a letter from Mary. She had retired and moved in with her daughter in another state, but they still kept in touch. "You know, Annie," Mary wrote, "I think about that day you took Ethan home all the time. I was sure you'd regret it. I thought it was foolish. But it turned out to be fate. You were right. You didn't just save one child, you showed others the way. I'm proud of you." And touched the letter gently. How strangely life weaves its threads, a forgotten infant in a hospital room, and now a center that saves hundreds of children. A scared, lonely girl, now a confident woman changing the system. On the Rodriguez family porch, in the quiet of the apple orchard, the whole family gathered on a warm summer evening. And then David, Ethan and Kate, Robert, now in a wheelchair, his eyes still sharp, and Isabella, gently holding his hand. Time had woven their hearts together tighter than blood ever could. Beaming, Ethan showed them an ultrasound photo. "Your grandchild," he said softly, like offering a treasure. And, trembling, looked at the blurry image, a tiny heart beating in rhythm with all of theirs. Her eyes filled with tears. Left alone beneath the stars, she whispered to her younger self. "Trust your heart. It knows the way. Life can hit hard, but love, even in a whisper, is stronger." The whisper of a cry in an empty hospital room. The rhythm of a tiny heart against hers that changed everything. And smiled at the night sky, crying, but this time, from joy.